The front door of the Wilson mansion closed with a heavy sound, cutting through the silence like a warning. Robert Wilson, one of New York's most powerful billionaires, had returned home 3 days earlier than anyone expected. His world was built on order, silence, and control. But that evening, something felt different. From the marble hallway came the soft sound of laughter, children's laughter. Robert froze. He lived alone. There were no children in his house, not even visitors. The noise came again, followed by the gentle hum of a woman's voice. He followed the sound slowly, each step echoing through the empty hall like thunder. The smell of warm milk drifted from the kitchen. When he reached the doorway, his eyes stopped. There stood Sandra Miller, his maid, wearing her plain blue uniform, holding 2 small children in her arms. One clung to her neck while the other slept against her chest. The sight hit him like lightning. His voice broke the air, sharp and cold. "What is this?" Sandra's hands trembled, but her eyes stayed firm. She whispered, "Please, Mr. Wilson, let me explain." But Robert didn't want explanations. Not yet. The rules of his house were clear. No family, no noise, no lies. Yet standing there in front of him was everything he never allowed, and something inside him began to shift, though he couldn't explain why. Robert's eyes narrowed as he stepped closer, his polished shoes tapping hard on the marble floor. The warmth in the air felt strange against the cold that filled his chest. The woman he had always known as quiet and disciplined now looked like someone else, someone fighting to hold her world together. "Explain," he said, his tone low but full of anger. Sandra took a breath, clutching the sleeping child gently. "They're my sister's children," she said softly. "She passed away last week. Their father left them. My mother was caring for them, but she fell sick. I had nowhere else to take them." Robert's jaw tightened. "You brought them here, into my home, without permission?" Sandra nodded slowly, tears forming in her eyes. "Yes. I didn't know what else to do." His voice grew sharper. "You should have known better, Sandra. You work here. You know my rules." "I know," she said quickly, her voice shaking but still strong. "But I couldn't leave them alone. My mother can barely stand. She fell last week, and I thought she would recover, but she didn't. I prayed for another option, but I had none." Robert crossed his arms, his face cold. "You think my house is a shelter? You think because I pay you well, you can bring strangers here?" Her lips trembled slightly. "They're not strangers, sir. They're family." He stared at her, his expression frozen. The sound of the children's soft breathing filled the room. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Robert said, "Do you have any idea what this looks like? To my reputation? To my staff? To anyone who finds out?" Sandra looked up slowly, tears glistening on her cheeks. "Reputation," she repeated softly. "While you worry about your name, I worry about whether they eat. I worry if they'll be safe. I worry if the world will forget them like it forgot my sister." Robert's anger wavered for the first time. He had expected fear, maybe an apology, but not this, not her courage. "Do you even understand how serious this is?" he said, his voice quieter but still firm. "Yes," she said quickly. "But do you understand how serious it is for them?" She tilted her chin toward the babies. "Their mother is gone. Their father disappeared. My mother can barely move. I am all they have left." Her voice broke, but her hands never shook. She rocked the children gently, whispering something soft in Spanish to calm them. Robert felt a tightness in his chest that he couldn't name. He looked away for a second, clenching his jaw, trying to rebuild the wall inside him. "You should have told me," he said. "I was afraid," Sandra whispered. "Afraid you'd send them away. Afraid you'd fire me. I didn't want to lose everything at once." Robert turned away and walked toward the counter. His reflection stared back at him in the black marble. He didn't like what he saw. The man staring at him looked hard, but empty. He looked back at Sandra. "You've been hiding them here for how long?" "3 days," she said. "For 3 days my mother tried, but she couldn't move, so I brought them here. I thought maybe, if I was quiet, no one would notice. I prayed you wouldn't come home early." He let out a slow breath, pressing his hands against the counter. The air between them grew heavy. He wanted to say something cruel, to end this conversation, but he couldn't. The sight of those children, their small faces resting against her, made his anger feel foolish. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. "If you want to fire me, then fire me," she said quietly. "But please, don't blame them. They didn't ask to be here. They didn't ask for any of this." Her voice trembled at the edges, but her spirit didn't break. For the first time, Robert saw strength in her pain, not weakness. He ran a hand down his face and sighed. "You made a terrible choice," he said slowly. "You should have trusted me to decide what's right." Sandra nodded softly. "Maybe I should have. But sometimes people like me don't have the luxury of waiting for help. Sometimes we just have to do what love demands, even if it costs us everything." Robert stared at her, frozen. The word love echoed in his mind, twisting something deep inside. The mansion was quiet again. The babies had drifted back to sleep. Sandra's face was tired, but peaceful. She looked like someone who had carried pain for too long but refused to let it crush her. Robert finally spoke, his voice low. "You'll take them back tomorrow. We'll talk about this then." Sandra lowered her head. "Yes, Mr. Wilson." He nodded once, turning toward the door. His footsteps echoed down the hall until they faded completely. When the room fell silent, Sandra looked down at the children. Her tears slipped quietly onto their small blankets. She held them closer and whispered, "It's going to be all right, I promise." Upstairs, in his study, Robert poured himself a drink he didn't touch. His thoughts were restless. For years he had lived inside silence and power. But now, for the first time in a long time, silence didn't feel like peace. It felt like guilt. He stared out at the city lights below, wondering how one maid and 2 small children had shaken the fortress he built around his heart. "We can of the derefer his ride, to have an ass for a weed, also have an see yous and fanded with not capted." Morning light slipped through the tall windows of the Wilson mansion, touching the marble floors like a slow fire. Robert Wilson had not slept all night. He sat in his study, staring at the city skyline through the glass wall. The usual peace that came with power wasn't there. His thoughts were heavy, circling around one image, Sandra holding those children close like her life depended on it. He rubbed his eyes, then stood up and walked toward the kitchen. The mansion was quiet, too quiet, but the kind of quiet that carried tension in the air. As he neared the kitchen, he heard the soft hum of Sandra's voice again, the same gentle sound he had heard last night. When he stepped in, she was there, wearing the same blue uniform, her eyes tired but calm. The children were awake this time, sitting on a blanket spread on the floor, their tiny hands reaching for plastic cups she had given them to play with. Sandra looked up the moment he entered. Her smile faded, but she didn't move away. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," she said softly. Robert didn't answer at first. He just looked around the room, then at her. His voice came low. "I thought I told you we would talk today." She nodded. "Yes, sir. I was just feeding them. I'll listen." He walked closer, stopping across from her at the counter. The air between them felt heavy. "You've worked for me for 4 years," he began, his tone steady. "You've always followed my rules, never questioned anything, never made a mistake. Why risk all that now?" Sandra looked down for a moment, her hands tightening around the edge of the counter. "Because I had no other choice," she said. "You always have a choice," he replied sharply. She looked up, her eyes red but firm. "Not when it comes to them," she said. Not when the world doesn't care if they live or not. Robert frowned. Don't exaggerate, Sandra. There are systems to help. Sandra let out a small, bitter laugh. Systems? You mean the same system that lost my cousin's child for 2 months? The same system that places children anywhere just to close a file? I've seen it. Once they go in, they disappear. My mother begged me not to do it. She said, Sandra, promise me you won't let strangers raise them. So I promised. Robert's jaw clenched. So instead, you brought them into my home, he said slowly. You lied for 3 days, hid them, and prayed I wouldn't find out. She nodded. Yes, I prayed. Because I knew what you'd say. And what's that? That rules are rules, she said quietly. That my job is more important than 2 children with nowhere to sleep. I knew you'd tell me to take them away, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't break my promise. Robert's fingers drummed against the counter, each tap echoing in the silence. His anger was building again, but this time it felt mixed with something else. He wasn't sure if it was guilt, or fear, or confusion. He had built his whole life around structure and control, and here she was, standing firm in front of him, breaking every rule but holding her dignity like armor. He finally said, Sandra, you've put me in a difficult position. You can't bring personal matters into my house. Do you understand how this looks? To my staff, to anyone who might find out. Her voice rose slightly, trembling with emotion. I understand what it looks like, sir, but I don't care how it looks. I care how it feels. Those babies have no one but me. My mother is in pain. The doctor said her bones are too weak to carry them anymore. I couldn't leave them alone. I chose wrong in your eyes, but I chose love over fear. Robert's chest tightened. Her words cut through his usual defenses. He turned away for a moment, staring out the window. You talk about love like it fixes everything, he said. Sandra's voice softened. It doesn't fix everything, but it's what keeps people alive. It's what kept me alive when I lost my sister. She died in my arms, Mr. Wilson. She told me to keep them safe. I couldn't break that promise, not for any job, not even this one. Robert turned back, meeting her eyes. The sharpness in his face began to fade. You should have told me, he said again, but this time his tone carried regret, not anger. I was scared, she whispered. I've worked here for years, and I know the kind of man you are. You don't bend rules. You don't show mercy. I thought you'd see me as a liar, not a sister trying to save what's left of her family. Robert stayed silent. The twins began to fuss, small cries breaking the tension. Sandra knelt quickly, picked one up, and pressed him against her chest, patting his back slowly. Her voice dropped into a quiet rhythm, whispering in Spanish, soft and warm. The sound of it filled the kitchen. He watched her closely. The way she held the child, steady and calm, the way her tired body still found strength to soothe them, it stirred something deep inside him, something he had tried to bury for years. Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer. How long has it been since you've slept properly? Sandra looked up, surprised by the question. 3 days, maybe 4, she said quietly. Since my mother fell. Robert let out a long breath. And yet you still came to work. I had to, she said. I can't lose this job. You've been good to me. You pay me fair. It's how I take care of my mother. I thought I could manage both. He nodded slowly, then said, You can't keep them here, Sandra. You know that, right? She nodded, her eyes full of sadness. I know. I'll take them back today. I'll find another way. Maybe someone in the church can help. Robert looked at the 2 small children, one now asleep in her arms, the other sitting quietly on the floor. Their tiny hands reached toward each other, like they were holding on in a world too big for them. His chest ached again, and he turned away quickly. Go upstairs and rest, he said finally. You look like you're about to collapse. Sandra's eyes widened slightly. Rest. Yes, he said. Take the guest room for now. I'll think about what happens next. She hesitated, searching his face for the anger she expected, but it wasn't there anymore. She nodded slowly, whispering, "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." He watched her carry the children out of the kitchen, her steps careful, her arms strong despite her exhaustion. When the door closed behind her, the mansion felt quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence. Robert stood alone, his thoughts spinning. He had told himself for years that control was power, that feelings made men weak. But now, for the first time, he wasn't sure if his strength had protected him or just made him lonely. He looked at the small cup the baby had dropped on the floor. He picked it up, placed it on the counter, and stood there for a long time, staring at it. Something inside him had changed, though he couldn't name it yet. That night, the Wilson mansion was quiet again, but the silence no longer felt peaceful. It felt heavy, almost alive. Robert Wilson sat in his study, staring at the fire burning low in the marble fireplace. The flames moved softly, but he couldn't feel their warmth. On the desk beside him lay a pile of papers, reports, and contracts waiting for his signature, but he couldn't focus. His mind kept drifting back to the image of Sandra walking out of the kitchen, the two small children in her arms, their faces pressed against her shoulder. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The words she said earlier played in his head again and again. "I chose love over fear." Robert had never heard anyone say that to him before. In his world, love had no place in decisions. Power, logic, and control were what mattered. But tonight, he couldn't stop thinking about that sentence. He poured himself a glass of water, his hand shaking slightly. His reflection in the glass window showed a man who had everything money could buy, but nothing that could fill the emptiness sitting inside him. For years, Robert had believed silence was peace. That silence meant control. Now he wasn't so sure. The sound of those children laughing in his kitchen earlier that day had brought a strange feeling into the house. It was noise, but it wasn't chaos. It was life. He rubbed his temples and let out a long sigh. He remembered being a boy, sitting in his parents' house. They were wealthy too, busy with business dinners and parties. There was a house full of servants, but never warmth. He remembered the long nights when he sat by the window waiting to hear his mother's footsteps, but she never came. The house was silent then, just like now, and he had learned to live with it. Maybe that was why Sandra's voice felt different to him. Her singing, the soft way she spoke to the babies, even her defiance, it all carried something he had lost long ago. Heart. He looked toward the staircase. Upstairs, he knew she was asleep in the guest room, probably exhausted. The children were quiet now. For the first time, he found himself wondering how she was doing, if she had eaten, if she had enough to cover her mother's medicine. Those questions were strange to him. He had never asked them about anyone. He stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city lights far below. The world outside was moving fast, but inside this mansion time had slowed. He felt trapped between the man he used to be and the one he was becoming. Robert whispered softly to himself, "Maybe I've been living wrong all this time." The thought scared him. He wasn't used to doubt. Doubt made him feel weak, and weakness was something he had always avoided. But now, it didn't feel weak. It felt human. He sat back down, his elbows on the desk, and thought about Sandra again. Her eyes had carried both pain and courage. She didn't beg him to understand. She stood her ground. That kind of strength wasn't from money or position. It came from love. He had seen thousands of people chase success, but never someone stand so firm for something that gave them nothing in return. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts without purpose, then stopped. He thought of calling someone, maybe his lawyer or his assistant, to find a solution for Sandra's problem. But then he paused. For once, he didn't want to fix things with money. He wanted to understand. The clock on the wall ticked quietly. Midnight passed. He sat there for hours, lost in thought. Images filled his mind. Sandra's tired face, her trembling hands holding the children, and that one sentence echoing like a heartbeat. Some promises are worth breaking rules for. He realized she was right. For all his rules and order, what had it given him? He had built a life surrounded by walls, but those walls kept everything out, even compassion. He thought about the babies again, the way they had clung to her, trusting her completely. That kind of bond wasn't built on wealth, it was built on care. It reminded him of something his grandmother once told him before she passed. People remember how you made them feel, not how much you earned. He had forgotten that. Maybe he never really understood it until now. He leaned back, his eyes heavy but his heart restless. He whispered again, "What am I even protecting anymore?" The fire had almost burned out, leaving just a soft glow. He stood up, walked to the mantel, and placed his glass down. His reflection looked different now. For the first time, he saw a man who didn't need more power, he needed peace that money couldn't buy. Outside, the sky was starting to turn gray. Morning was coming. Robert turned off the lights and walked quietly upstairs. As he passed the guest room, he heard the faint sound of a baby stirring. Then came Sandra's voice, soft, sleepy, still gentle. She was whispering in the dark, "Shh, it's okay, I'm here." He stood in the hallway, frozen for a moment. That voice carried a warmth that reached deeper than anything he had known. He didn't open the door, he just listened. And in that quiet moment, something changed in him completely. He went back to his room, but he didn't sleep. He sat on the edge of the bed, thinking about what he would say to her in the morning. He knew now that firing her wasn't an option. It wasn't about rules anymore. It was about what kind of man he wanted to be. By sunrise, his decision was made. He would help her, truly help her, not because she asked for it, but because it was right. When the light filled the room, he stood by the mirror, buttoning his shirt slowly. The face looking back at him was still Robert Wilson, billionaire and businessman, but there was something softer in his eyes now. He whispered to himself, "Maybe it's time to fix something real." Downstairs, the mansion was quiet, but not cold. The scent of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Sandra would wake soon. The twins would start crying, and for the first time, Robert didn't dread the noise. He almost wanted to hear it. He took a deep breath and stepped out of his room. This morning would be different. The man walking down the stairs was not the same man who stormed through them the day before. Something inside him had opened, and he was ready to face what came next. Morning sunlight filled the Wilson mansion, sliding across the walls like a quiet promise. The house that once felt cold now carried a strange warmth. Robert Wilson stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway, watching Sandra Miller rinse dishes in the sink. She was tired, but calm. The two toddlers were in their stroller beside her, giggling softly as they played with plastic spoons. It was the first time he had seen them laugh. Their laughter was small but real, and it echoed through the marble hall like music. Robert cleared his throat gently. Sandra turned around quickly, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyes carried that same caution, the same fear from the night before. "Good morning, Mr. Wilson," she said softly. He nodded once, stepping inside. "Good morning." For a moment, silence hung between them again, but this time it wasn't angry. It was gentle, unsure. He looked at the twins, then back at her. "I thought about what you said," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "You were right." Sandra frowned slightly, not sure what he meant. "Right, sir?" He nodded again. "About promises. About love. About how some things matter more than rules." Her eyes widened a little, but she didn't speak. She stood still, holding the towel tightly. He continued, I built this house to stay perfect. Every corner, every sound, every wall, everything had to be under control. I thought that was peace, but I was wrong. This house was quiet, but it wasn't peaceful. It was empty. Sandra looked down at the floor, tears already filling her eyes, though she tried to blink them away. Robert took a small step closer, his tone gentle now. You made a mistake. Yes, but not the kind of mistake that deserves punishment. You broke my rules, but you did it to protect something precious. That takes courage. Her lips parted slightly. Mr. Wilson, I didn't expect forgiveness. I only hoped you'd understand why I did it. He nodded. I do now. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. So, what happens next? He paused, thinking. You'll stay here. You'll keep your job, but things will change. Your mother will not struggle anymore. I'll hire a nurse to care for her, and she'll get the medicine she needs. Sandra gasped softly, one hand pressing to her chest. A nurse? You would do that? Robert's eyes softened. Yes, and as for the children, they won't go anywhere near a shelter. I'll see to it personally that they're safe, cared for, and protected. I'll cover their needs until you can stand on your feet again. Tears rolled down her cheeks. She shook her head slowly, unable to speak for a moment. I don't know what to say, she whispered. You don't have to say anything, he said. You've already said enough with your actions. Sandra wiped her tears and tried to smile. You don't know what this means to me, to my family. Robert smiled faintly. Maybe I do. He glanced toward the children. One of them had dropped a spoon and was staring at it, confused. Robert walked over, picked it up, and handed it back to him. The boy smiled, a small toothless grin, and for the first time in years, Robert smiled back without forcing it. Children don't care who you are, he said softly, almost to himself. They just feel what you give them. Sandra nodded slowly. That's true, sir. They know kindness when they see it. He looked at her again. Then maybe it's time I start showing it. The room went quiet again, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't cold. It was full of understanding. Later that day, Robert made several calls. By afternoon, a nurse was sent to Sandra's mother's home in Brooklyn. Medication and groceries were delivered. Sandra's phone rang, and when she heard her mother's soft voice saying she felt better already, she covered her face and cried quietly in the corner of the kitchen. Robert watched from a distance, pretending to read his emails, but his eyes never left her. The sound of her relief filled the mansion with something money could never buy. Days turned into weeks. The house began to change. The kitchen no longer echoed with emptiness. It carried the sound of soft laughter, of small footsteps, of life. Robert started taking his breakfast in the kitchen instead of his office. He found himself talking to Sandra, asking about her mother, about the children. The twins learned to wave at him, and one morning, when he walked in, they called him Mr. Bob. Sandra laughed shyly when she heard it. They can't say your name fully yet, she said. Robert chuckled softly, shaking his head. That's all right. It sounds nice. Something inside him healed each time he heard them laugh. One evening, he came home from work earlier than usual. The house was filled with a warm smell of soup. Sandra was feeding the children at the table. The sunset poured through the window, painting everything golden. For a moment, Robert just stood there, watching. The mansion that once felt like a museum now looked like a home. He stepped closer and said quietly, "You've changed this place, Sandra." She looked up, surprised. "I didn't mean to." He smiled gently. "Maybe not, but you did." He took a breath and said, "You've proven something to me. You're not just my maid, Sandra. You're someone stronger than most people I've met. You didn't fight for yourself. You fought for others, even when it cost you everything." She lowered her eyes, her voice soft. I only did what my heart told me to do. He nodded. And that's what makes it right. The twins reached for her hands again, their small fingers curling around hers. Robert looked at them, then back at her. In their little faces, he saw what love looked like without fear, without pride. That night, as the city lights came on, Robert sat alone in his study again. But it didn't feel the same. The fire was burning brighter. The silence was not empty. He finally understood that true wealth was not in the buildings he owned or the money in his accounts. It was in the lives he chose not to walk away from. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Sandra," though she couldn't hear him from down the hall. In that quiet house, the sound of the children's laughter drifted through the air again, mixing with the gentle hum of a woman's voice, and for the first time in years, Robert Wilson smiled with peace in his heart. Dear viewers, this story reminds us that money can build walls, but love and kindness are what make a home. Robert Wilson had everything, but it took one maid's courage to show him what being human truly means. Sometimes, the strongest people are the ones who choose compassion when it costs them the most. If this story touched your heart, tell us what you learned in the comments, and where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes love can change people.